your face so that it is at least a little bit like meeting up with you. It's okay if you don't want to. There's a capacity to use the chat. This is the symbol for the chat at the bottom of your screen. And when you click it, it should come up at the side of the picture. Use it to ask questions of Lidia, and you can make other comments too if you'd like to. We're looking for a range of questions for Lidia as she prefers to answer these as we go. Two of our members, Julian and Lynn, will be sorting the questions and will raise them during the session. If you have any problems with technology, then at the top of the chat, we have Julian's mobile, so you can text him or call him if you need with any queries. It's not quite at the top of the chat, but you will see that there is a phone number there for you if you are in strife. And Julian is our man. We have managed to keep ourselves chugging along with providing these Zoom sessions for large numbers and building our website with the wonderful blogs we've put up on the sessions we have run. And this has provided it for those who missed them or who are following up on information. And we're working on others for you each month. But all this electronic access comes at a cost. We would usually have recouped our meeting costs from our face-to-face meetings. Do you remember our buckets at the door? And without these, we are now needing to ask you for some assistance here. And Mick Nolan is here to briefly explain how you can help us.
Thanks, Carolyn. Hi, everyone. Yeah, look, as Carolyn said, COVID-19 has meant that we've been operating our forums and meetings, of course, on Zoom since about March. So what that has meant that is our face-to-face meetings, our monthly meeting and our forums, which is a big opportunity for us to raise funds and get donations, we've been missing out. So we're very conscious of that. We think typically that's worth about $3,000 is what we would typically raise through that. And as Carolyn said, website maintenance, that's about $1,000. Zoom, artwork banners and flyers. We'll be certainly doing a fair bit of printing for the council elections coming up for climate scorecards and that sort of thing. And that sort of gets funded through the donations. So look, we're asking for people to go onto our website and make donations. We think typically that $3,000 would be 50 to 100 people that would be helping us, keep rolling. So we're asking for people, if they would, to go to www.lighterfootprints.org. So that's our website, www.lighterfootprints.org. all one word.org, and there's a button up in the right hand side it's very easy to find. There's a button up there. If you click on that, it'll take you to a fairly straightforward place, and we would just be super thankful and would help us continue doing what we're doing. We'd be really appreciative for the people that were able to do that. So thank you for your time.
Thanks, Mick. We do have some faithful donors who've been regular supporters, and we are very grateful to them. It's tough times for all of us, so please know that anything you can do, we will feed straight back to you through the things that you see on our website and through our emails and Zooms. We do try to offer you good value. We've never asked in that way before. That's a first.
Can I just add as well, I mean, we do pay for some services like our website. We did a major overhaul last year. That was a big project that we undertook. So we hope you like the website if you haven't already seen it. But there's no paid staff. But of course, a lot of these costs are ongoing, budgeted costs.
Absolutely right. So, okay, now let me outline the agenda for tonight. I'll shortly introduce Lidia to talk to you about issues she sees as important for us as climate movement to be considering. As I mentioned, she's indicated that she likes to make a connection with her audience through questions during the course of the evening. So we're going to try to do as much of that as possible. This will take us to around 8:30, when we will offer you your own small group contact and ask you to meet with a handful of others to either just listen or to chat to people about the issues that have been raised. These small groups have been good for those who've chosen to take the risk of meeting new people and talking with them. And we'd especially ask that you give this a try tonight. This is a topic we are all learning about. It deserves thinking about, and there'll be many things that you might raise with your small group in the 10 to 15 minutes we have assigned. For the last part of the evening, Lidia will give us a few final words, and then we'll hear from two of our working groups, the letter writers and energy. This will be worth waiting for when you hear about this month's quite amazing range of letters published right around the country. You will be astonished. And we'll be done by 9 p.m. And so we begin tonight with our guest, Lidia Thorpe. Since we booked Lidia to speak to us tonight several weeks ago, she has been selected by the Greens Party as the replacement for Richard Di Natale as a Victorian senator. She's likely to take up that place in September, or as COVID determines. Lidia Thorpe is a Gunai Gunditjmara woman, mother of 3 and grandmother living on Wurundjeri country, about to become the first Aboriginal senator for us in Victoria, the first federal Aboriginal representative for the Greens. She was the first Aboriginal woman in Victorian Parliament in 2017 as the MP for Northcote. And we're very grateful indeed that Lidia is joining us tonight. In recent times, we have seen waves of community outrage about the US police treatment of African Americans, which drove the Black Lives Matter marches all around the world. This, combined with Australia's appalling record of deaths in custody of our Aboriginal people, has forced attention on the fundamental racism of our society. I'm speaking personally here when I say that I think for those of us trying to bring about change in the way we go about saving and protecting our environment against the forces of what is euphemistically called growth and development, rather than what it really is, greed and destruction, we are doubly troubled by racism, not only because of what it does to our First Nations people, but because in the face of the mismanagement of our land, our water systems, forests, grasslands, deserts, shores and oceans, and our recent devastating bushfires that have left us all reeling in horror, all of these failures have highlighted the huge price we pay for the loss of our long-standing Indigenous knowledge and management of this country's fragilely balanced ecology. And this is in part why we're asking for a conversation with you, Lidia, because we are aware of the awfulness of racism and its deep, abiding impact in so many complex ways. And we're lucky enough to find a connection to someone who might lift our understanding of that complexity and tell us what we need to hear and show us what we need to do about taking our next steps together in an attempt to rescue what we can. A friend sent me this quote tonight, which I just want to read to you because I was absolutely amazed at it. It's been put there as a result of COVID. Oh, shit. How do I say I've got it? I have got it here. Right, this is it. It's from a woman called Breen Brown. I don't know this woman, but I understand she must be quite something, and a writer. We will not go back to normal. Normal never was. Our pre-corona existence was not normal other than we normalised greed, inequity, exhaustion, depletion, extraction, disconnection, confusion, rage, hoarding, hate, and lack. We should not long to return, my friends. We are being given the opportunity to stitch a new garment, one that fits all of humanity and nature. I thought, oh, yes, I thought I'd read it. because it reminded me, Lydia, of the smaller quote from you, which is, communities look after themselves when they look after country. If the land is sick, the people that inhabit those lands probably aren't doing so well either. The struggle for climate justice and the struggle for Indigenous sovereignty is connected. We start with this big question, Lydia. How do you see the connection between the struggle for climate justice that we see so clearly and the struggle for Indigenous sovereignty? So Lydia, it's over to you.
Thank you, Carolyn. And thank you to Lighter Footprints for the invitation way back when. A lot has happened since that invitation. So I'm really honoured to be here, and I'm hoping that we can have a conversation because I think, that's what we need to have more of in this country. We need to create those opportunities for more conversations so we can have a better understanding about one another. And I think that, COVID has given us a bit of that opportunity that we really need to take seriously, of connecting with one another and taking the time to actually listen and learn from one another. So I also will acknowledge that I'm on Wurundjeri country. As Carolyn said, I'm a Gunai Gunditjmara woman, and I want to pay my respects to the Wurundjeri people who are survivors of genocide, who are survivors of the assimilation process, who, continue, despite everything that they've been through, they continue to share their country, their culture, their language, their dance, their song with everyone who occupies their lands today. So I think that's a true testament to the Wurundjeri people and many other clans and nations around the country, that we, despite what we've been through and despite what we're still going through, we've still got our hearts and our minds and our arms open to the Australian people to have a better understanding about us and the country that you all live on and benefit from, so that you can be part of this journey and not go back to that old way or the old normal, and let's create a nation that is that everyone can benefit from, and that we don't leave anyone behind. And that's how I've been raised. I come from strong matriarchal lineage of Djapurrung country, Gunditjmara country, Eastern Maar, and my grandmothers survived all of horrific injustice against them and their old people. So if we look at Gunditjmara country, there are over 70 clans once upon a time before colonisation, and since colonisation we only have just 7 left. So over 60 clans were absolutely annihilated. They were wiped out, and I'm living proof that we survived. So without those strong women in my family, I wouldn't be who I am today. And we've always been raised with the values of looking after one another, looking after our community, and looking after our land and our water and everything that belongs to that. So that's just, it's not a Greens thing, it's not an environment thing, it's just how we are raised as blackfellas in this country. And it's something that if we all just took a piece of, I think the world would be a better place. So in terms of the climate, climate justice and sovereignty, we can't have climate justice without First Peoples justice in this country. It's just a fact of the matter. And we can go out campaigning for climate as much as we like, but whilst Aboriginal people in this country are still dying at the rate that we are, we won't ever reach climate justice. It has to go hand in hand. And when we look at the amount of the insurmountable injustice that Aboriginal people face in this country every single day, and I'm part of that. You know, my family, my community, we're not immune to deaths in custody. We're not immune to child removals. We're not immune to the injustices. It's something that my own family and community experience each day also. And, you know, it's just the extra load that you carry with you in whatever work that you do. Regardless of whether you're a senator or not, it still happens. And I suppose my message is that we have to fight these injustices together. We have to bring the movements together to seek justice for all. Aboriginal people have been denied a voice at the table because, you know, a lot of the environment groups and climate groups, their number one priority comes from a conservation aspect. It doesn't ever look at how they include First Nations people. And this is something that I've been involved with for a long time and worked with the Australian Conservation Foundation in a consultancy. I went around the country talking to Aboriginal people and environment groups and climate groups and Santos and Warren Mundine. I spoke to absolute conservatives who want to dig up uranium, to grassroots Aboriginal people who are putting their bodies on the line to fight country. And there is a mass divide, and there has been for far too long. And I think that, you know, it kind of suits government to have that division between First Nations and climate or environment, because, you know, as long as we're separated, they can deal with us individually. But when we come together, we are an unstoppable force. And I know that because I've seen it and I've done it. And, you know, Jabiluka's a very good example, and Jackie Katona is a good friend of mine. She was one of the strong Black women that led that fight, and the environment and climate groups walked side by side, but it was Black women who actually led that campaign. We go to the Central Highlands in Victoria, which I'm sure you're all aware of. You know, those campaigns have been running for decades, but they did not have the clans who actually belong to that country involved. No Wurundjeri, no Gunai, and no Tanarong people involved in any of the campaigns associated with saving the Central Highlands and stopping the logging in that part of the country. So through some of the work that I was doing in between losing Northcote and becoming a senator here, I got the clans together and said, hey, let's go out and look at what's happening in the Central Highlands. And I, you know, invited David Lindemeyer and a couple of others who were involved in those campaigns for so long, and asked them to give an update, a briefing to the clans about what they've been doing and why they've been doing it without us. And why do they call the lead-beater possum after a taxidermist when it's actually the totem of the Tanarong and its name is the Walert? So when you go out with a different angle and you have First People's voices at the forefront, then it makes it a bit more difficult for government, because government want to do a treaty with First People in this state and in Queensland and now in the Northern Territory. So it's an opportunity to, I think, wedge the government by saying, well, if you really want to do a treaty, then you need to stop logging the country, because what is a treaty? You know, what will a treaty deliver us as First People? So that's two examples of where you know, the two movements have come together, and we've decolonised a lot of the wording that is said, and we've had to bring those campaigners along on a bit of a journey about the protocols of going on country, because there are rules, and to know those rules you have to have genuine conversations with the traditional owners whose land that is. And Adadi is another good example, disappointingly, because I did go to that site and I saw the same issues and I called it out whilst I was there. And, you know, we can't win these fights if we are separate. We can't win the fights if the Wanganjungaloo people aren't part of the whole Adani campaign. And I know that that's bridging now, but there were issues. And I'm not saying that we can join these two movements without issues. We're always going to have issues, but I think we can do it a lot better than what we have been, and now is the opportunity to do that.
Sounds amazing what you're doing. Amazing amount of work. Looking at the links between groups that are doing things that are related to environment, and yet not yet seeing the links with Indigenous. You did quite a lot of work with the ACF, didn't you, that looked at the climate movement, which includes groups like ours, and we're not involved directly in any of that sort of stuff. Did you make any recommendations about how ordinary climate activists might be able to support you better?
Look, I think there was quite a lot of recommendations, and it was very well received. The board unanimously adopted the recommendations. The main recommendations that everybody can be a part of is we asked, or one of the recommendations was for the ACF to pay the rent for being on stolen land, and they agreed to do that.
Can you explain what that means?
So paying the rent is a concept that came up in the early 80s. It was a way where Aboriginal people could economically empower themselves without being, you know, under the government's agenda and seeking funding for, it was actually health in those days. So it was a scheme that was set up where non-Aboriginal people were being asked to pay the rent to the landlords, the original owners of the land. It's not a charity. It's simply paying the rent for the land that you're on, because we've never received any of the stolen wealth that this country has created over the last 240 years. So it was a way that we could self-determine our own destiny through this economic independence. And so ACF had agreed to give us a office space in the Green Building in Carlton, where we will be setting up the first sovereign hub, and the sovereign hub will be supported by the pay the rent scheme, as well as other environment groups within ACF. So, you know, in terms of media training and kind of administrative support, majority of the businesses within the ACF or the Green Building will contribute one way or another. And so the Sovereign Hub is basically a place where we can cultivate our own campaigners, where we can actually see Black campaigners getting paid to protect country, but also to continue the fight against the deaths in custody, the incarceration rates, the child removals. So we look at it holistically. We don't look at it, you know, through a siloed approach, saying we've got to just deal with climate. If we don't deal with it holistically, then it won't work. And so we have to address all of these issues at once. And that's where we're asking the climate groups and supporters to, you know, walk with us when we are going out trying to fight for our children to be returned back to their homes, to stop this mass incarceration rate, to stop these deaths in custody, and we will walk with the climate protesters.
This
So
is sort of like literally, isn't it? Walk with us. That might be a question. I'm going to flick across to Julian now to see if we've got a question off the chat.
Sure, absolutely. I'm interested, I must admit, this is a question I have as well. Speaking about what orgs and community groups can do, what do young Indigenous activists need, and what might our audience members be able to give them and amplify their voices?
We need they need the platform. You know, our voices are not considered in a lot of areas. You know, Vic Forest wanting to log the forests. They didn't have any Aboriginal representation when they did the regional forest agreements. It was just a ticker box. So it's about elevating Aboriginal voices, and sometimes that means stepping aside and allowing that space for an Aboriginal person to come forward. What we don't have is we don't have the resources behind us. We don't have a massive campaign behind us. The only thing that we've inherited in this country is transgenerational trauma and a struggle. And that's something I don't want to hand down to my grandchildren. So we need to be supported with resources and expertise. And these sovereign hubs, we've got one, you know, because of COVID, we haven't been able to open it. But we want these sovereign hubs to be going around the whole country. And I spoke to Wangundjungulu about this, and they are that excited because it means an office space, with a computer, a photocopier, you know, all the things we take for granted, right, in our organisations. This is what we need, just the basics. And then the environment and climate groups, they support these hubs, and we work together. And we work from the one agenda for the one reason. And that's what I alluded to earlier with the government keeping us separated. The sovereign hubs are about bringing us together, because you won't find many Aboriginal people calling out Aboriginal corporations for signing off on dirty mining deals. But and you won't find any environment groups doing that either, because they would be considered racist to do that. And they've told me that themselves. But a sovereign hub with independence will do that. And that's what's missing in this struggle.
Lynn, do you have a question that you had a look at in the chat that you'd like to pull out?
Sure. This is from Brad from XR. How important is nonviolent civil disobedience and direct action in the fight for climate, racial, and social justice? And could Lidia talk about her personal experience on the front line?
How important is it for non-violent? Well, we deal with so much violence every day, systemic violence, police violence. It is very important to Aboriginal people. We can't afford to have any more people die or be incarcerated. So it is extremely important, and we've got to respect the country that we're on. And you know, our elders don't like violence, and we have to listen to our old people and not create situations where people are going to be harmed. My own experience was in Nowa. I lived in East Gippsland for 15, 16 years, and I was part of the Nowa development group. I was the only black fella on this group. I had the local doctor, the general store person, a very small little town, if you know it. You know, and if you blink, you miss it when you're going through. So Nowa is between Lakes Entrance and Orbost, and it has this incredible gorge running through it. It's where the fresh water meets the salt water. So there's only certain breeds of fish that can swim in between the fresh and salt water. So it's quite a significant area, and there's a very sacred story that is associated with that gorge. The Eastern Gas Pipeline wanted to come through in the year 2000 to put gas from Longford to Sydney, and to do that they wanted to put explosives through the Nowa Gorge. They needed to make a 6-metre easement and make the hole big enough for a massive pipeline to go through. I was pretty poor at the time, single mum, so I didn't even have an Aboriginal flag. I made that out of bits of material I had hanging around. I had a toothless pit bull, but looked dangerous. And I chained him up to the homemade flag, and Duke Energy 4-wheel drive came down the easement, and I was sitting there and said, "You can't come through." Anyway, the campaign lasted a few months, and they offered me $10,000 to go away. And today it's the only bend in the pipe from Longford to Sydney is Nowa Gorge. So they were forced to go around the gorge. It cost them millions of dollars. The lead guy, who was very disrespectful to me and my people, he got very ill and he had to be flown back to America. So yeah, it just shows one person can create a lot of change and put a bend in a very long pipe.
Good for you. Julian and Lynn, have you been picking up some other questions that might be useful in the chat? I can throw in one that interests me. This is one that I've received. The saying of the acknowledgement of traditional owners has been an issue in the Boroondara Council and in others, with the acknowledgement being made optional and the council prayer being made compulsory. Does the saying of the acknowledgement matter to you, and why should it matter to us?
I think if Boroondara don't want to acknowledge country, I wouldn't force anybody who doesn't want to do that.
All right.
I wouldn't like to see tokenistic gestures. I mean, that's just as bad as racism. They're just doing it to appease the blackfellas. I'd rather people not do it. In fact, I've told Vic Forrest never to do it. I've told, AGL, do not ever do it. You can't have power stations on my country in the Latrobe Valley and think that you can acknowledge country. What is that? So I think we need to get real about an acknowledgement to country. I have a personal approach to acknowledgement to countries. I think that it should be genuine, but it also should be about what you have learnt about that country that you live on. So the elders past, present, emerging, I don't do that. And I encourage others not to do that, because a personal story is, telling a story gets to people much better than this kind of regular acknowledgement. And you see a lot of people turning off now in meetings. It's like, oh, the acknowledgement. I've seen it in Parliament all the time. But, you'd expect that, I suppose, in places like that. But
do you think it would be not important for it to become a bit of a ritual nevertheless? Because it's going to be hard to be able to make it new and fresh every time with a new sense of, I've got a new story, and yet you want to be respectful and you want to make sure that people know that you are. And so it's going to sound like a bit of a ritual.
Yeah, but the Wurundjeri language is massive. My youngest daughter was learning Woiwurrung language, which is the language of the Wurundjeri people, and the language is massive. So, one challenge I put to a young person who asked me to do the acknowledgement, I said, next time we do an acknowledgement, I want you to do it. I want you to go away and learn something about the country that you're living on, and then you can do the acknowledgement. When it came time to meet again, in front of the whole Zoom meeting, he did this most beautiful, powerful acknowledgement because he went and done his homework. And that's all we want people to do in this country, like learn the truth of the country that you live on. Learn a bit of language of the country that you live on. And then you start becoming part of it, and you start truth telling to others, and they don't even realize you're doing it. So I think there's a lot of truth telling to do in this country. We've had, you know, Victoria has experienced so many massacres, you know, over nearly 70 massacres that we know of, and we're still counting. So even if we talked about a massacre, how many people were killed, where they were killed, how they were killed. It's what we do at the dawn service every year. And it's very, very enlightening to a lot of people.
Thank you for that. That was very useful, very interesting. Anything from Julian or Lynn off the chat?
Yeah, sure. We've got quite a few questions coming through on treaty. So very interested in where the Vic process is up to, the federal process is up to, and how the idea of treaty might link into the opportunity for Indigenous Australians to drive environmental governance on their own country better.
So Victoria treaty process, well, they're currently looking at the framework, and they're consulting on the framework. I'm sorry to use inverted commas, but you know, the fact of the matter in the Victorian treaty process, 93% of Aboriginal people didn't participate, didn't sign up to vote, and just didn't want to be a part of it. So only 7% of Aboriginal people in Victoria participated in voting for those that sit around the table today, as well as the 11 that were had automatic seats that had already relationships with the government. So if we're going to look at a national treaty, it can't look like what's happening in Victoria, and it can't look like what's about to happen in Queensland. That'll just be a duplication of Victoria, and I'm sure Northern Territory will take the same blueprint from here. That's not a treaty. You can't say you want a treaty with the First Peoples here and log our land and destroy jacarong trees and take our children away. You know, incarceration rate of women in Victoria has gone up over 400%. So we are in a crisis here in Victoria as Aboriginal people. And I think that if the government is serious, then they should show some good faith. One of the carrots that they dangled at us about 4 years ago in a meeting in Benza with 100 people is they put up a map of all the Crown land that was left in Victoria and said this would be part of a negotiation in the treaty process in Victoria. Well, we haven't seen that map since. We know that the government have announced mass public housing sell-off and mass public land sell-off. So that was meant to be part of a negotiation, which we'll, you know, maybe never see because there's not much of that land left. So it's hard to feel good about the Victorian process. I hope that they do better, and I hope that conservation and environment and our wildlife are protected as part of that process, but I wouldn't be holding my breath. So in terms of a national context, I think that it needs to be internationally scrutinised. I think that we have a blank canvas as a nation. We've been colonised for too long in this country, and we need to decolonise. And I think that a treaty in this country will be good for everybody, not just us, it'll be good for everybody. And through that process, we can negotiate the closure of power stations. We can negotiate outcomes for our environment and our wildlife and our water, because the current native title process does not work. It's there to protect the miners, and not our people. And you've seen lots of examples of that lately with sacred sites being blown to the smithereens.
Lynn, do you have a question from the chat?
Yes, just to follow on from decolonizing, can you talk a little bit more about what it means to decolonize language?
Well, I'm going to use a controversial example, which wasn't my idea. It was John from the Herald Sun, but he came up with the idea of changing the name of Victoria. And then the headlines obviously said that I came up with it. But, you know, it is about changing names. Probably not Victoria just yet, but locally we can do a lot of name changing, and we can decolonize by changing names. And it's not just about changing the name, it's understanding why the place is called that. There's usually a story behind that, which informs people of the local landscape and the care for that part of the country and the wildlife that goes with it. So I think, you know, that's one example. But also some of the systems that are in place in this country, they're not set up to, you know, work for us or people who are disadvantaged in this country. So I think we can decolonise in a way that we're more of a caring, sharing society, which is what sustained Aboriginal people for thousands of generations. You only take what you need. And you share, you look after your old people, you look after sick people, you look after poor people, you bring them in and you know, you give them a go. I don't see that happening in this country.
It's probably very timely to be making comments like that, I think, about how we look after our elders. Julian, is there one more from the chat that you'd like to pull up?
Ray would actually like to follow up with, is there a model for treaty somewhere else in the world that you would like to see in Australia with Indigenous peoples?
I saw that one pop up and I thought immediately, you know, none of them were perfect. They've all been broken. So I think we should be looking at the pros and cons of all of those treaties, particularly those that, you know, did treaties with the Crown, and we should be taking the best of all of those treaties and starting our own. We don't have to. We can have our own treaty. We can, and sorry, it has to come from the people for the people. It can't be the government who decide this for us. The only way we're going to have real change in this country is if the people are at the table making the decisions. And we have an opportunity to do that. Our movements are building. We put the Black Lives Matter movement with the climate movement, the environment movement, then you've got, and the refugee movement, let's not forget about our refugees. You know, if you bring all those movements together, then we will be one unstoppable movement. And that is about addressing the injustice and inequality that goes on in this country.
That's a very powerful position to hold. I guess you'll be keeping your hands open for examples of where treaties have worked in the best way and building a proposal. Is that one of your roles, as you see? Who's driving this?
So how I see it working is if we go back 20 years and we look at what John Howard did with the reconciliation movement. He resourced the biggest consultation this country's ever seen with blackfellas.
Right.
And that was to talk about reconciliation. And there was a reconciliation kit that local community groups could go through together and have a better understanding about what reconciliation is and what it could be, and getting ideas from local communities. And there were town hall meetings happening. I was one of the facilitators in Victoria. So there were town hall meetings, local councils, local community and local Aboriginal people to talk about reconciliation. The outcome of that was that this country was too racist to reconcile. That was 20 years ago. 20 years later, I think we've come a long way.
Mm.
And I think that we should do pretty much the same thing with a treaty process. So we do a full consultation process through local governments and local communities, and we put treaty on the agenda. And I see one question there on the chat was about the Uluru Statement. And we put that on the agenda as well, because that wasn't true consultation. It only had 200 people in the room. We've got thousands of blackfellas across the country, many different languages and clans and nations. So if we go back to that model of the reconciliation process, do that again, and we hear from people like yourself, what do you want to see in a treaty? And we build the framework around it that way. We can have some overarching key, themes that come through. But I think it has to come from the people, because if it doesn't come from the people, it's not going to work. And I think that we can do that together. And just quickly on the Waitangi Treaty, they've got good elements of the Waitangi Treaty. When you go to that country, you know what country you're going into. When you come here, you could be going into any colonised country. It looks like you're coming into England. But one of the things that they've done, they've got dedicated seats in Parliament. I think that's a good way to go. But the problem with that in New Zealand is that those dedicated seats are party aligned, and I wouldn't like to see Aboriginal people with reserved seats or designated seats to be party aligned. I'd prefer to see it independent.
Do you see yourself being able to continue this kind of discussion once you're in the Senate?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think, what else have we got that's going to bring us together as a nation? I can't see anything else. We live in such a divided country. We need something that's going to glue us together. And I think treaty is the vehicle to do that. And I think all of those things that we're experiencing, all the injustices, both environment and social, they can all be underpinned by a treaty.
Well, that's very interesting. Sounds like this is a driving force for you then, and you've built it over years, and you're taking it with you as one of your strong sort of shields, the thing that you'll be carrying with you. Yeah,
well, I just, I see our children growing up and my daughter experienced her first bit of racism in Year 7 at the same school that I went to, that I left when I was 14 because of racism. And I just said to myself, this can't continue. We cannot go through this world having to deal with this injustice all the time, generation after generation after generation. What can we do that's going to bring this nation together? And we see some of those politicians in federal parliament only think about how we can divide the country further. So we need someone in there that can talk about how we can bring this nation together. I want to talk to Pauline Hanson about that, and I want to lead by example, that we may not all agree on politics, but surely we can agree on bringing this country together so that we can celebrate something for being here, instead of hiding on 26th of January or rallying on 26th of January.
I hear what you're saying. Just on another related topic, but not exactly on the treaty type stuff, but on this thing called the Green New Deal that we've heard such a lot about in the rest of the world. Do you have an interest in framing the climate actions around the Green New Deal? And as a senator, would that be one of your interests?
Absolutely. I think the Green New Deal will fit nicely with treaty. I think it complements one another. It is about, you know, sustainable jobs. It is about transitioning out of fossil fuels. And yeah, look, it goes hand in hand. And how Adam sells Green New Deal will be different to how I sell Green New Deal. I'll probably give you the decolonised version, and Adam will give you the Greens version. But it's all one in the same, and it's about how we go out together that brings people along and brings people together. So look, I think there's lots of opportunities through Green New Deal.
Lynn and Julian, we've probably got time for a question each from the chat to wind it up.
Okay, this is a question that seems to come up a lot from Jordan. There seems to be growing recognition of cultural burning as a practice of reducing the total area affected and the intensity of destructive wildfires. Research is also showing that traditional fire management practices significantly reduces carbon emissions and could be an effective mitigation strategy. Do you think the government is ready to listen to traditional knowledge and scientists? And if not, how do we make them listen?
How do we make them listen is, I think, you know, what I've said earlier, and that is elevating the voices of Aboriginal people so that we can be heard. But I think, you know, cultural burning is one example of what we have to offer. There's a whole, you know, there's thousands of generations of knowledge still with us that we can share with mainstream Australia if we are given the opportunity. But remember what we're dealing with. Like, don't ever forget what we deal with as Aboriginal people every day in this country. And that's all those things I said. And I'll keep saying it. Child removal, incarceration rates, destruction of country, deaths in custody. It's just relentless. And, you know, family violence. So we, you know, it'd be nice to have a break from it to be able to do what everyone else gets to do out there. I think, I'm just trying to remember the first part of your question. Sorry, can you just say that first part of your question?
Sure, I'll just go back to it. There seems to be growing recognition of cultural burning as a practice of reducing the total area affected.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. You know, I've heard politicians talk about cultural burning and using cultural burning as an excuse for burning at wrong times. So I think any kind of cultural burning needs to have the authority of traditional owners who have that knowledge. And there, you know, there are traditional owners that don't always have that knowledge. So my concern around cultural burning is that it is done where cultural burning can be done. If we look at the logging practices that we're seeing, particularly in Gippsland and the Central Highlands, can we culturally burn in those areas? And, you know, I asked that question of traditional owners, and I asked that question of the department. But what I'm hearing, particularly from CEO of Vic Forest, is that, you know, traditional burning is good. So when I see that coming out from places that do a lot of harm to country, it concerns me that cultural burns are being bastardized just to get away with burning areas that they shouldn't be burning. So we have to be very careful about this, and we have to make sure that we sit down with traditional owners who have got that knowledge and that we do it properly, because there's areas that shouldn't be burnt at all.
Okay. Julian?
This is a question from Vivian from the start of the night and flows on quite neatly from there. an acceptance of a relationship with country and getting climate groups to acknowledge that there's a new way to understand their relationships with land. How effective of a tool is that going to be going forward?
Look, it's been quite effective. There's been a number of environment and climate groups that, so one of the recommendations to the Australian Conservation Foundation was to share the information with other environment and climate groups and actually put pressure on them to do something. And the response has been quite overwhelming. There's a couple that have pushed back, and I won't name them. Really big organisations that have pushed back, but the majority of them have been very good, and they're starting to change some of their practices. Environment Victoria, for example, they're working with traditional owners on the coal-fired power stations in the Latrobe Valley. First time, Gunai country, working with Gunai people about the power stations that affect my people. Our babies are being born tiny for however long since, in the Latrobe Valley. So the health impacts that are impacting on Aboriginal people and the wider community have been going on for decades, and people were unaware that it's the power stations doing that. So those conversations are being had now in 2020. So that's one example, but there are many other examples where environment groups have reached out and said, right, we want to do something, we want to pay the rent, we've got expertise in this, we want to, we're thinking about running a campaign, we want traditional owners involved in leading it and helping us shape it. So it's started to change. It's slow. COVID's made it even slower. But there is work happening, and I'm really hopeful.
That's fantastic. I've been trying to write down just a few little things just to see if I can throw back to you some of the things that I think you've highlighted for me, because we're going to ask our people to go away and think about things that were highlighted for them. And I thought if we just throw these up, some of these are things that you could say, yes, yes, and then you could add in things that I've forgotten. You started off with telling us to listen, to add you to the table. In other words, expand the way of thinking of who's involved and sitting around the table, to find out about the history of the land that you live in, to actually explore, take your own time to find out the history of well, in our case, the Wurundjeri people. And that's a task that you've given to us, because it's doable and gettable, but we have to look for it and find what matters and gels with us. We need to walk with you, walk with us, you say, walk with us, which is such a literal thing and such a powerful symbol. So it means getting in step, it means understanding and taking the trouble to educate ourselves. We need to share the platform, particularly with young people, which means moving over and making way, thinking again about whether you need to be there or somebody else does. Some kind of reassessment of your own particular need for dominance. Stepping up to pay the rent. Interesting concept, that one. Looking for ways to pay back. And I'm sure that you've got a lot of examples of ways in which that might be done. You mentioned the Sovereign Hub, and there may be ways that we can specifically lead to greater ways, more. We're not quite sure how that's going to, what it's going to need, and how we might contribute to it and learn from it. How you in the hub might feed back into us. That's an avenue to be explored. Gosh, there's lots more, especially in these last few questions. The treaty, the whole business of the treaty, the issue of it being an early part of the negotiation for reconciliation on a scale as big as happened once before. That's amazing to think that we might perhaps revisit a process which led to us defining ourselves as too racist to be able to do it. I think that is a very powerful concept. And then there's the whole business of working with our Indigenous people in every possible way. What I think is that in thanking you, I don't want you to disappear quite yet, because we've got a little bit of time to go. And if you would like to be part of one of the groups, we're planning to have just a split for between 10 and 15. We'll have a look. We'll see how the groups are going, to talk with each other. And I just put down, this is what I said. One person is going to need to ensure that everyone gets a go. You just decide, okay, how are we going to do this? And somebody was going to have to take that role. But that's, once you've done that, you don't have to say anything, by the way. If you just like to listen, you can do that. So as a group of 5, just go and sit and those who do want to talk can talk, and those who don't, who just want to listen, they can do that. But hang in there and do this in a group of 4 or 5. The question for discussion is, what has struck you tonight from what Lidia has said that you will take away and think about more? Choose one thing. I raised some. There was more that I didn't raise. Now, if you can record your responses in the chat with the group, I think that somebody can, then we will subsequently make a broad analysis of this and put it in the blog. It would be interesting to us what you say about what resonated with you. So if it's possible to do both those things, recording it is a second thing, but just having the chance to talk to each other is the first. So now we're breaking.
Sorry, Carolyn.
Yes?
Can we just get very big crowd? Thank you everyone for coming. Can we just get some nice photos? Can everyone be smiling and waving? And I apologize, I have to scroll through 6 pages of people. So can we just look happy?
Oh, that's so good, isn't it? 6 pages. Right.
So everyone cameras on, everyone looking smiling and happy. Oh, there we go. There we go. And I'm going to be saying this quite a lot because I've now got to go through all these pages. Everyone keep looking. Oh, this is the most awkward part of the night. I'm crying. And you can pause a little bit longer. Oh, look, everyone down the end smiling. And we're going to the last one now. And everyone keeps smiling. Oh, terrific. Love it.
You did it. Wow, that's so good. This is such a lovely thing. There was 160 odd people who came out. So thank you so much. And for those of us who have hung in there for this, let's take a break. I think you will enjoy this. Meet up with just a few of us and then come back. We'll hear from Lidia. We've got a couple of other things on the agenda. So see you soon.
Cool. I think everyone's back. You back, Carolyn?
I'm back.
Lovely.
And we're all back. And that's, well, that was, for me, that was fabulous. I really enjoyed that and got a lot out of it. I wonder if there's anything in chat. I don't know if people were able to record things, but if you weren't, and you have got that idea that you could put in chat even now, that would be useful to us. Okay, I'll leave it at that. Thank you so much. I'm just going to go to my running sheet. I would like, before we get on to our working group sessions, to go back to Lydia for her final words. Is Lydia still with us? That's one question I should ask first.
I'm here.
You are. Fantastic. What I'd like to do, Lydia, is give you the final word, really. It's just to say, tell us how you feel about tonight and what things you want to leave us with.
Someone in the Breakout group reminded me of the school strike, the climate strikers, and how, you know, they get it. They work with Aboriginal young people. They're just brilliant in how they operate, very respectfully. And it reminded me of when I went to my first school strike, and this, you know, thousands of young, majority white children all said, always was, always will be Aboriginal land. And it was just a climate strike. And to hear thousands of young people say that, yes. I cried. Because it made me realise that we're not alone anymore in this struggle, and that we have got so many people that are willing to face up to the past wrongs in this country and acknowledge, so that we can heal together and then ultimately move forward together. And I think that's what tonight also represents for me, is that, you know, we are in this together. We can't survive without one another, and we are part of this earth, and we can't survive without that either. So I just want to say thank you to you all for the work that you do in caring for country and each other in being part of this group. So thank you very much. I really appreciate your time as well. And we're just people, politicians.
Yes.
Politicians are people. I can't fathom why they're put up on these big pedestals. We are people, and we need to be treated like people.
Well, we're going to treat you like a person, and we're going to link to you like leeches, so that you can be feeding back to us what it is that you're doing and how you need us to be. And I reckon this is a bond we've made. So thank you so much for your time. We've loved it. You can hang around for the last little bit if you like, or you're ready to go. We released you. The last little bit is having a look at our letters and what we do for paper. You will be astonished, even Lydia. Plus having a quick report on the energy group. And so I'll leave that up to you. But
I'm gonna rush.
You're gonna rush.
I've got homeschooling still.
Oh my goodness!
Well.
Off you go. And thank you so much. We'll finish off the last 10 minutes together. Thanks, Lydia. Bye-bye. Okay, I'm going to ask now for Ray. Ray Peck is our extraordinary manager of the process of letter writing, and he's put together some fascinating slides. Would you like to go through the process of sharing those at the moment? Ray, are you able?
Yeah, I'll just try and share my screen, Carolyn.
Yes, can you do that or not?
I think so.
Good.
Is that working?
Yeah, that's working. So, right, just quickly through would be great.
Oh, okie doke. For the people that are new, we have a letter writing group with over 50 people, and there are people writing letters right now as we speak to the newspapers, and we've had a big month. So I'd just like to share with you a couple of our lead letters and some statistics. So Bill Chandler's a terrific letter writer, and he succeeded in getting a lead letter in the Australian Financial Review, and he was followed by Bob Brown. It's a good combination. And Bill packs a lot into his letters. So in this particular letter, he was able to link together the COVID recovery with post-World War II efforts in the Snowy Hydro project and the effect that had on reducing unemployment to 2%, which is something that is being talked about a lot. So he reminded us of that, and then went on to talk about renewable energy and storage as being cheap and clean. And he said, why are we stuffing around so much? We just need to get on with it, for heaven's sake. And if you can see right at the end there, coincidentally, it wasn't planned, but he talked about Indigenous fire management. So I'm sorry that Lydia's gone, because I think that that's particularly good for tonight's event. So that was in the Australian Financial Review. And just a little warning now for any Indigenous people who are still with us. The next slide has an image of an Indigenous person who is deceased. We had 2 lead letters, both with Indigenous references. This one, a very sad story, but a very important story by one of our new writers, Alan Havelock, about death in custody. So he picked up on the death of George Floyd and the effect around the world of that tragic death, but wondered why the death of Veronica Nelson was described on page 11 of The Age and not on page 1, and went on to talk about the horrendous situation Veronica was in, apparently calling for help for 9 times and was ignored. So Alan's message here is, why are we turning a deaf ear to deaths in custody in this country? And it's been over 400. And how would white Australians feel? Would they tolerate similar situations if the shoe was on the other foot? So we don't just write about climate-related matters. We are a wide-ranging group, writing about very important issues generally. So they were our 2 lead letters for July, very powerful letters. Mark Darcy had 2 letters published in the same day, one in Melbourne in The Age about cancelling Parliament, and one in the Sydney Morning Herald on you might have seen the coastal erosion situation up in there. So Mark conquered Melbourne and Sydney in one day. In July, we've had a record month. We've had 74 letters published. That's more than 2 a day. And of those 74, 59 of them were climate-related topics. So a fantastic month. Well done to the letter writers. Welcome to a new member, John Mossig, who had a letter published in The Age on the war games going on in the South China Sea. We're slowly taking over the country. We've had 36 climate letters published in 22 interstate and regional papers by 7 of us. And our map looks like this.
That's hysterical.
So, all the way from Hobart in the south to Darwin in the north, from Port Augusta in the west to Sydney in the east. So We're going well. And there's some pretty good discussions going on in Townsville at the moment. So around some of our letters. We're stirring the possum a bit up there.
Oh, that's so good.
It's quite amusing. But what we're trying to do is support local people whose properties are being threatened by this supposed post-COVID recovery push to cut through red tape. So there's just so much happening when you start reading the regional papers, and people are scared about the effect it's having on their local environments. So our letters are supporting those people, and we're also letting them know of new reports and positive movements the streams that are coming on board. So they've got something to talk about their local members too, other than coal mining. I'm going to hand over to Mick now, who can talk about one of our new innovative tasks we took on in July.
Okay, thanks, Ray. Hi, everyone. Yes, look, so
now, do you want to not share here so that we can see Mick, or do you want to take that? Or you working on the same thing, are you?
Oh, leave it there, Carolyn. I think my face should be coming up when I talk, is it?
No, it doesn't. Not with us against the share screens. It will if that share screen is not there.
Do you want me to stop sharing the screen?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think so.
Okay.
Yeah. Thanks, Ray.
Righto.
Okay, so look, so the Energy Transition Group meets once a fortnight at the moment since COVID. So we've actually gone from once a month to once a fortnight. If anyone feels interested, maybe drop Carolyn an email and she can forward it on to me so I convene that group. As Ray said, we've been working on the Victorian emissions reduction target for 2025, and we've really done a lot of homework with that to come up with what we think is consistent with 1.5 degrees, not higher than 1.5 degrees of warming under Paris. So that was a fairly dry exercise, but we've really amped up in the last 3 or 4 weeks in a couple of ways. We've linked up with the letter writers and other people interested in understanding the Victorian targets, which is going to go up as legislation in early August. So we've said, let's get that 60% by 2030 consistent with 1.5 degrees, and we're not going to accept, a lot of Footprint's position is we're not accepting 2 degrees of warming as anything like viable. So we've had a couple of sessions with the letter writers and other people associated with the letter writers, and on the back of that, there's been a lot of letters go to MPs, people's local MPs in all sorts, anyone in either group, letter writers or energy transition group. And the other thing that we've been doing is sending to climate ministers, transport ministers, energy ministers, and everyone that are shadow, so Liberal, Labor and Greens in the state. And what's been just as a result of that, I think, flurry of activity last week, we've had 2 meetings with MPs this week, with 2 people going along to meet in Hawthorn and I think in Burwood or Box Hill. So that was today. So the next thing we're tackling is the BZE Million Jobs Plan, and we're really trying to bring the BZE Million Jobs Plan, which is going up to Canberra as a group. We're trying to make that what is relevant for here in Victoria. Where are the jobs in a decarbonised, low emissions future, short term, medium term, even long term, but even short, medium term? Where are the jobs? Where are the emission reductions? Where is the inclusiveness? We've heard all the things that Lydia's talking about. So we're trying to distill the $1 Million Jobs Plan and put it through a lens that says, what should we be doing here in not only Melbourne, but in Victoria? So that's now our task we've set ourselves last meeting. As I say, if that's sounding interesting to anyone, it's not just about energy, I will say that as well. So we called ourselves the Energy Transition Group. I think we've got to change the name, or we just, that's the legacy, because we're talking about soil, we're talking about animals, we're talking about transport, we're talking about electricity generation, renewables. So if that's of interest, get in touch.
Thank you, Mick. It is of interest. I can assure you it's very good, that group. I am now winding up for the night. I have just two things. One is, don't forget to go to lighterfootprints.org and press the donate button, because whilst we reminded you at the beginning, it was hard for you to do it at that point. And it would be just terrific if we could just get a few donations to help cover the costs. We would appreciate it just so much. It really does help. And the other thing is to say that our next meeting is 26th of August, and it is about local government best practice. And so check when you go to the Lighter Footprints website, check out what that looks like. It's going to be a very interesting night with a panel from two councillors from two different councils, plus a consultant who's familiar with a range of different work across councils. We look forward to seeing you then. I'm trying to think if there's anything else from anybody that I may have forgotten, but I think not. We're pretty much on time. So wonderful night. I shall look at the chat and see what we can do with that, because I think there's some interesting responses that we've got from the groups. We'll put it all together in the blog that we already have. Don't forget to check our blogs. They really are impressive. People who write them put a lot of energy into them. So thank you so much. And
Carolyn, I think yes. John wants to say something.
John, sorry, I can't see John.
Need to unmute John.
Mute.
Oh, he can't unmute himself, only Julian can.
Oh, Julian?
I was unmuted, but I got muted again.
Ah, there we go.
Okay. Two things. To the person who asked the question on the screen, just to let you know that we do not have deduction for gift taxation.
Right. Sorry, I didn't miss that.
And the other thing I'd like to mention, that there were two donations within 5 minutes of your mention of the subject.
Yay!
I can't say how much, but certainly they came up.
Happy to hear that some
good result.
It's good to know that it makes a difference to you if you give it a bit of a jiggle. Thank you, everybody, for coming. I hope that the follow-up from this will give you something to go away with. Thanks again. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you, everyone. That was lovely.
Great.
Thank you, Julian.
So much.
Thanks, Julian. Thanks,
Well
Carol.
done.
Yes, most
well
helpful.
done.
Can we just hold this so that I can copy the thingy, please?
Oh, the chat.
Yes,
yep.
Please, the chat.
And I'll save it as well. Let me know when you are, and I will.
I don't see a leave